On March 18, 1984, a Japanese man named Kahatsu Ezaki was at home enjoying his evening when suddenly two masked and armed men broke into his house and kidnapped him completely naked. Ezaki, the owner of a famous sweets factory in Japan called Glico, received a ransom note the next day at his factory. The criminals demanded 1 billion Japanese yen and 100 kilograms of gold, equivalent to $10 million. They told them that the delivery would be at a public telephone booth on the street and that they would determine its location. But 2 days later, and before they paid a single dollar of the ransom, Ezaki managed to escape from the kidnappers. Before dawn, when no one was watching him, he managed to untie the rope they were tying him with and break down the door of the warehouse where they were holding him. He escaped, and to answer your question, he was not naked because they gave him clothes after they kidnapped him. He ran away from the place until he found two railway workers, and they helped him call the police. The problem was that Ezaki couldn't identify the kidnappers or their features in any way. Although the kidnapping failed, the kidnappers didn't stop. They came back and sent a threatening letter to Ezaki and his factory. The letter said, "If you don't pay us $480,000, we will poison the candy the factory produces with cyanide." To prove their seriousness, they sneaked into the factory and set fire to parts of it. This way, everyone knew they weren't joking, and they created a state of panic. What they did after that terrified the entire Japanese people. The Japanese police had to use more than 130,000 officers to try to catch them. For those who are seeing me for the first time, welcome from inside the event. I talk about everything strange and mysterious on planet Earth. Today, I will tell you about a case in which the entire Japanese people participated with the police to solve it. But the criminal was smarter than everyone else. The police did not know who to blame, and they did not have any specific suspects. In the 80s, a case like this that puzzled them was very rare, because the numbers said that the Japanese police were the strongest in the world. In 1984, they solved 97% of murder cases and 55% of theft cases. Therefore, their failure to solve the Glico case was a black spot in their history and damaged their reputation. Even a well-known newspaper in Japan called Yomiuri published a large article on the front page in which it wrote, "We do not remember a case in the history of Japan in which criminals laughed at the police in this way." This attitude humiliated the police in front of the people, to the point that the criminals were even challenging them publicly. Over the course of more than a year and a half, they sent the police more than 100 letters. These letters mocked the police and challenged them to catch them. They were seriously giving the police information and hints to prove that they were smarter. The first letter began with the shocking words. To the police, the first letter read, "To the stupid police officers, is it possible that you are so stupid? All these police officers and you are unable to do your job and catch us. If you were really professionals, you would have been able to catch us. But since you are disabled, we will give you some hints." The hints were in the form of clues to the identity of the criminal, such as the criminal may be from inside the factory, or the owners of the warehouse that Ezaki managed to escape from may be involved. The letter writer gave them additional details, telling them that the car they used in the kidnapping was gray, and even giving them the address of the supermarket where they bought food after kidnapping him. At the end of the letter he wrote, "If you can't catch us after all this information, then you are simply thieves who steal money from people who pay taxes. People pay taxes so that the state can provide them with security. But it seems that we have to kidnap the chief of the prefectural police." Frankly speaking, the criminals wiped the floor with the police after this letter, because they were not satisfied with it. They started sending large quantities of letters to newspapers and magazines. The criminals were amazingly skilled at attracting people's attention. The letters they sent to the press and media were intended to ensure that their threats would be widely disseminated. And indeed, the story spread throughout Japan. Everyone began following the case like a movie. The letters they sent were full of random but exciting information and turned the case into a mystery that occupied everyone's minds. But the police were unable to use any of these letters, which put them in a difficult position in front of the public. Frankly speaking, the police were working hard on the case, but the criminals were unusually intelligent, and the police were unable to track them down in any way. The only thing they could tell from the letters was the tone of the writing. The criminals were using a tone similar to that of the Osaka people speak this way, so the police thought the culprit might be from Osaka. Although this observation was clever and insightful, it didn't help them in any real way. After the first 3 months of the case, the person who sent the letters began calling himself the mysterious man with 21 faces at the end of the case. Things remained the same until September 1984, when a new development came to light. This time, another confectionery factory called Morinaga began receiving threatening letters. The criminals demanded a ransom of $410,000 and said in their letter, "Don't worry about what will happen." 8 days later, Japanese newspapers received the following letter: "To all mothers in Japan. In the fall, when appetite is high, sweets are very delicious." Of course, when we talk about sweets, the first thing that comes to mind is Morinaga candy. So we added a special and new flavor with potassium cyanide. It tastes a little bitter, but at least it won't cause your children's teeth to decay. We put warning labels on cans containing poison in 20 cans in stores from Hakata to Tokyo. On the same day, store and supermarket owners across Japan began to discover poisoned cans. 18 cans were found that day alone. One of these cans was found in a supermarket just 32 meters from the home of Ezaki, the first factory owner they kidnapped. Although the police and citizens were unable to find all the poisoned cans, and no one died, 2 cans remained missing and unreported. Then, a new message arrived from the criminal saying, "Next time there will be 30 cans, and we will not put warning labels on them." This message spread terror throughout Japan. Over the next 2 weeks, more than 40,000 police officers were deployed to monitor stores and supermarkets across the country. But what did they gain from this? Nothing. No one can know whether the criminals actually carried out their threats and designed another 30 poisoned cans or not. In the midst of this chaos, investigators found surveillance camera footage from one of the stores where the can of poison was first found. The footage showed a man with curly hair, glasses, and a baseball cap, placing something on the shelf where the can of poison was found. Unfortunately, the quality of the camera footage was so poor that they were unable to identify the man. However, the police decided to release the footage to the public, hoping that someone might recognize him from some of the details. But once again, the result was zero. No one could figure out who this man was. In addition to the video recording, the police released recordings of the extortion and threatening calls sent to the factory. What was even more bizarre and frightening was that the voice that was speaking and threatening was not the voice of the gang members or the voice of the mysterious man with 21 faces. It was the voice of a woman and a young child. In one of the calls, the child was talking to the factory and giving them clear instructions to leave a bag containing money behind a seat at the bus stop. The calls made by the police to the people did not help solve the case. On the contrary, the case became more complicated, and the question of the entire Japanese people became, who is this monster with 21 faces? Things remained like this until March 1985, a full year after the Ezaki kidnapping incident. During this period, 31 food and confectionery companies were harassed and threatened. The Japanese police, with all their security services and investigators, were spinning around not knowing what to do. Imagine that some factories and companies responded to the criminals' requests and actually prepared the money and placed the bags in the places requested by the criminal. But the criminal did not take the money. In one of the threats that reached the Glico factory, the criminal asked the factory to send employees to a public phone located at a waiting station on the street. The police responded to the criminal's demands and sent 2 plainclothes officers to the public phone, pretending to be factory employees, waiting for a call from the criminal. But the call never came. The next day, a message arrived from the mysterious man with 21 faces, saying, "Do you think you're smart and want to make fun of me? I sent 2 officers in blue suits, pretending to be factory employees. It didn't work on me. I saw them through their eyes. They were clearly malicious." It was clear that the criminal was always one step ahead of the police. What was even more frustrating and surprising to everyone was that the criminal or criminals did not take a single dollar during this period. On August 12, 1985, a year and a half after Ezaki was kidnapped, the mysterious man with 21 faces sent his final message, announcing that he had decided to call it quits for good. The message was an announcement of the end of the case. At the time, news spread that the Japanese National Police and the media had received more than 28,000 messages from the criminals during this case, full of hints about their identities. In addition, the police used more than 130,000 officers to try to solve the case, but the result: complete failure. The police were humiliated in front of the public. After everyone learned these numbers, the question began to be asked over and over again. How did they fail with so many letters and officers? In the end, the police were forced to announce their final conclusions. They revealed the details of everything they had done during this period. The initial analysis of this mysterious case indicated that it was an internal matter, and that someone from within the Glico factory, or even Kahatsu Ezaki himself, was involved in the events. Many were skeptical about how Ezaki had escaped so easily from the warehouse where he was being held. They would say, how was he kidnapped and tied up and suddenly managed to untie the ropes and escape? What was even more suspicious was the difference between the factories. Glico was only threatened and its products were not poisoned. In the case of Morinaga, its candy boxes were actually poisoned. This raised some questions. Why did the threats to Ezaki's factory not go beyond the implementation stage, while Morinaga suffered real damage? But these doubts did not stand up to evidence for long. Logical thinking says that the accusation against the factory owner, Katsuo Ezaki, is unreasonable. The man lost a lot because of these crimes. His factory was closed for a while, his sales collapsed, and 2/3 of his employees were laid off. There was no reason for him to destroy himself and his business in this way. The second theory was more plausible. I suggested that the criminal or criminals were people seeking revenge on the food industry. The reason: a horrific incident that occurred in 1955, 30 years before the mysterious man crimes began. That year, a major tragedy occurred at a powdered milk factory. A worker at the factory accidentally dropped arsenic into the milk production line. The result was catastrophic. More than 12,000 babies became ill and 183 children died. This historical incident may have sparked a desire for revenge on the industry among some, who used their crimes to harm food factories and humiliate the Japanese police. But despite these analyses, the identity of the mysterious man with 21 faces remains puzzling mystery, unsolved to this day. Guess who this factory was? Morinaga. At the time, the factory agreed with the parents of the children who were sick and satisfied them. However, 14 years later, a report came out saying that those who survived the incident still suffered from damage to their bodies, and that they would continue to suffer from it. When the wave of threats against the factories began, the police wondered, why couldn't these kids, who are now 30 years old, be the ones doing this? When they were young, they suffered from poisoning from food and milk factories, and now they are grown up and want revenge. However, when the police thought about this possibility, they said, if these people suffered from milk poisoning from the Morinaga factory, why don't they attack all the factories? Their problem is only with this factory, so why don't they attack everyone? The third and final theory was that a person named Manabu Miyazaki was the criminal who did all this. Because in 1984, when the wave of threats against factories began, a criminal demanded that a factory deliver 100 million yen to a specific location. The factory complied and went to deliver the money, but they had already notified the police. At that time, the police noticed a person at the delivery location, and he quickly ran away from them. And when they tried to catch him, they were unable to do so. Then they tried to draw his features based on the description of the police who had seen him, and when they chased him, the drawing that came out with them resembled a person named Manabu Miyazaki. The drawing that the police drew was so accurate that the police brought the suspect's mother in, showed her the picture and said, "Do you know who's in the picture?" She said, "That's my son." And guess what? The suspect's mother was from Osaka, the same area where the police initially suspected that the writer's accent was similar to the locals. On top of that, it turned out that Manabu was the son of a big Japanese Yakuza boss, and he had problems with the government and had many cases before. However, they couldn't accuse him or prove anything against him because they didn't have any physical evidence. What was important for the police was to show people how hard they had investigated. So they went back 30 years and suspected the people who had been poisoned with milk. They also drew a person's features that were so accurate that his mother recognized him. In the end, they left it up to everyone to decide who the culprit was. The last thing I'm going to tell you that will shock you is that Manpo Miyazaki wrote a book about all the crimes he committed in his life and published the book right after the case of the mysterious man with 21 faces was closed. The cover of the book was a sketch that the police drew of him when they were investigating the case and suspecting him. This book spread like wildfire and made a profit of 100 million yen. This means that if Manpo was the one who got this 100 million and the police chased him and couldn't catch him, he would have gotten this 100 million in a clever way. If it was him, he would have been the person who insulted the police more than anyone else on earth. I hope you enjoyed the topic. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. Peace, and see you in a new video.